You're not getting in here. The words cut sharper than the metal gate pressed against her shoulder. The guard's voice boomed above the noise, stopping her cold while the crowd behind pressed forward, impatient to enter. Her chest tightened, but she forced a calm reply. My ticket's valid. Please, just scan it. He didn't move. He folded his arms, smirk spreading like he'd been waiting for this moment. Don't play games with me. You think you can just walk in without questions? The murmurs from behind grew louder. Someone barked, Hurry it up! Another added, Come on, man, let her through. But the guard leaned in, ignoring the voices. This line isn't for you, he said, each word heavy, deliberate. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. The stadium lights above felt like a spotlight, exposing her in front of hundreds of strangers. She tightened her grip on the ticket, heat rushing to her cheeks. I have every right to be here, she answered, trying to steady her tone. But he only chuckled, shaking his head like he knew something she didn't. The crowd shifted restlessly, their irritation feeding the tension. Phones began to rise, cameras catching every second. And still, the gate didn't move. His eyes narrowed, cold and calculating. The kind that stripped dignity before a word was spoken. Where'd you even get this? He demanded, snatching the ticket from her hand. Looks fake to me. Her voice wavered, though she fought to steady it. It was purchased directly. I shouldn't have to explain, he sneered, waving the slip in the air like it was a joke. You people always think you can slip past the rules. Tell me, what's the scam this time? Her stomach churned. She could hear the impatience of the crowd behind her, could feel their stares drilling into her back. Each question wasn't about proof, it was about power. I'm telling you the truth, she replied firmly, but his gaze never softened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for the venom to sting. I don't buy a word you're saying. The cameras captured his every movement, his tone dripping with suspicion. For her, the moment was more than about entry. It was about being treated like she didn't belong, no matter what she carried in her hand. And with each second, the hostility grew heavier. Behind her, the restless shuffle turned into mutters that clawed at her ears. She's stalling. Probably lying. Typical. The words, whispered but sharp, pierced deeper than the guard's glare. She dared not turn around, afraid to meet the eyes of those who judged without knowing. The sting of prejudice wasn't new, but the chorus of strangers made it unbearable. Phones hovered higher now. Some watched with curiosity, others with malice, each second amplifying her humiliation. Just move already, someone yelled as though she were an obstacle, not a person. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but she clung to silence. Dignity was fragile here, slipping away with every insult tossed her way, and still, the guard refused to budge. His silence was permission, letting the crowd pile their weight onto her. Finally, the guard spoke again, his tone dripping with mockery. Got an ID? Or do you expect me to believe in a smile and a cheap ticket? She pulled it out, her hand trembling, and held it toward him. He glanced at it, then laughed, shaking his head. This, please. Anyone can print something like that. You really thought this would work? The laughter cut deep. She could feel the crowd feeding off his words. Someone called out, Yeah, she's making it up. Another chimed in. Who sneaks in with that attitude? She clenched her fists, the sting of shame rising as his accusations grew louder. You're trying to sneak into a place where you don't belong, he barked, raising his voice so all could hear. And I won't let it happen. The cheer of approval from a few in the crowd twisted her gut. She wasn't just being questioned, she was being displayed, humiliated in public view. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of him. He shoved the ID back into her hand with disdain. If you've got something real, show me more. The words hung in the air, challenging her humanity as the crowd leaned in, waiting for her collapse. Her pulse thundered, but she drew a slow breath, gripping the ID tightly. Shaken but not defeated, she lifted her chin and locked eyes with him. The mockery in his gaze was afire, daring her to shrink. Instead, she stood taller, forcing herself into the silence between his words. You really don't know who I am, do you? The sentence landed like a blade. For the first time, his smirk faltered. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, curiosity replacing ridicule. Phones zoomed closer, recording the moment she refused to break. Inside, fear still clawed at her, but outwardly her stare was unshakable. She wouldn't give him victory. Not tonight. The tension held, stretched thin as the guard struggled to answer, his grip on the scene slipping, and with that line the balance began to tilt. Dad. "I wish you were here." The whisper slipped out before she could catch it, a quiet ritual each morning. The world still celebrated his name. Yet for her, the silence at the breakfast table was louder than any cheer. His absence wasn't just a memory. It was an emptiness that shadowed every step she took. She stared at the jersey hanging on the wall, its fabric worn yet untouchable. Legacy and loss lived side by side inside her chest. People praised his greatness, but they didn't see the daughter left behind, carrying both pride and grief. The day was just beginning, but already she felt the weight of expectations pressing down. She tucked her emotions away, as she always did, preparing to face a world that honored him but often overlooked her. And outside that door, the world was waiting to remind her exactly who they thought she was. "Hey, that's Kobe's daughter," strangers would say, as if her identity began and ended with him. At first, it made her proud. Who wouldn't be honored? But over time, the words felt like chains. Every introduction came with comparisons, every handshake with a reminder. She wasn't seen as herself. She loved her father, but she longed to be more than a reflection. Pride mixed with frustration, twisting inside her whenever someone judged her before knowing her story. She wanted to be recognized for her own strength, her own voice. But the shadow of a legend was hard to escape. Still, she walked with her head high. Even as those labels followed her everywhere she went, she remembered the little things. The constant stings that others brushed aside, clerks who checked her bag twice but let others pass without a glance, teachers who praised her father but doubted her abilities, strangers who spoke slowly as if she couldn't understand. Each incident seemed small, almost invisible, yet together they stacked like bricks, heavy and unshakable. "Don't take it personally," friends would say, but how could she not? When the pattern was always the same, when her very presence was treated as suspect. It was these daily struggles that built her resilience, but also carved scars no one else could see. And as game day approached, those scars whispered warnings she couldn't ignore. The stadium loomed like a cathedral, echoing with energy she both craved and feared. For most, it was a place of celebration, of unity. For her, it was complicated. She loved the roar of the crowd, the rhythm of the game, the reminder of her father's brilliance. But behind the cheers, she also felt the walls, the quiet elitism, the unspoken divide that told her not everyone was welcome equally. It was a place where she belonged by blood and history, yet also where she often felt like an outsider. As she approached it in her mind, she wondered if the gates would open freely for her or close just as quickly, without explanation. She was eager for the night ahead, eager to feel the electricity of the game. Yet excitement carried a shadow. Would they see her as herself, or only as his daughter? Would she be honored or dismissed? Her heart raced with anticipation, but beneath it pulsed unease, a quiet dread she couldn't shake. She whispered under her breath, almost as a shield, "I can handle it. Whatever comes, I can handle it." But even as she spoke, doubt lingered, warning her of the storm waiting beyond the gates. "Enjoy the game, folks. Don't spend all your money at the concession stand." The guard chuckled, waving through a group of white fans with ease. His grin was broad, his tone light. But when a black couple approached, the warmth cooled. His eyes narrowed, scanning them as though searching for flaws. No jokes, no welcome. Just a curt nod before he flicked them past. The pattern was obvious. Laughter for some, suspicion for others. She noticed, and her stomach tightened. It wasn't new. This was the quiet face of discrimination she'd seen too many times before. Still, she told herself to stay calm. Tonight was supposed to be about joy, not judgment. Yet something about his gaze, lingering longer on her than the rest, hinted that this night wouldn't pass without a fight. And as her turn came, The smile he had worn so easily vanished. Well, the guard muttered, voice suddenly clipping. Where do you think you're going? She held her ticket steady. Inside. Like everyone else? His eyes swept her up and down, his posture stiffening. The friendliness he had shown moments ago was gone, replaced by authority sharpened into suspicion. You sure about that? Don't look like you belong up here. Her chest tightened. This is my ticket. It's valid, he snorted as if her words were amusing. Relax, I'm just doing my job. Gotta keep people honest. But his tone wasn't protective. It was laced with disbelief, dripping with condescension, the kind that said no matter what she showed, it wouldn't be enough. Behind her, fans grew impatient, shifting, muttering. Yet he stood his ground, relishing the discomfort he created. She tried to stay composed, but every syllable from him carried a sting, each word designed to remind her she wasn't welcomed as easily as the rest. And when his eyes dropped to the ticket in her hand, the real challenge began. He pinched the ticket between his fingers, turning it as though it were counterfeit. Looks a little cheap, don't you think? Her jaw clenched. It's real. I bought it myself. He raised an eyebrow, mocking her. Sure you did. I've seen better fakes sold outside on the street. His voice carried just loud enough for the nearby fans to hear. A ripple of chuckles spread. Heat crawled up her neck. Check the barcode. It'll scan. Instead, he waved it dismissively. Oh, I'll check. But funny thing, people like you always got excuses. The words landed heavier than the ticket in his hand. It wasn't about paper. It was about her. For a moment, she thought about snapping back, about telling him exactly who she was. But part of her refused to play into his script. He wanted her to crack. Around them, the tension thickened. His performance wasn't just for her. It was for the crowd, feeding off humiliation. And with every second he dragged it out, she felt more alone. She glanced at the other guards nearby, searching for help. One leaned on the rail, arms crossed. Another adjusted his cap, eyes flicking away. None of them intervened. None challenged him. Their silence was its own betrayal. Every second they stayed quiet confirmed his power and her isolation. It wasn't just his prejudice, it was their willingness to let it stand. Their indifference gave him permission. Her voice cracked as she tried one last time to reason. You know this isn't fair. You see what he's doing. But their blank expressions answered louder than words. The message was clear. She would face this alone. And as the laughter from the crowd swelled, the guard straightened, savoring the stage he had claimed. Then, without hesitation, he lifted his arm to make his point unmistakable. His arm shot out, solid and deliberate, barring her path. That's far enough, he sneered. The barrier wasn't just physical, it was symbolic, a wall built from arrogance and prejudice. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You can wait out here, until someone important says otherwise. The smirk on his face was sharper than any blade. He knew exactly what he was doing, dragging out her humiliation in front of strangers who whispered, filmed, and judged. Her pulse pounded, anger and shame colliding. But instead of stepping back, she stood frozen, staring at the arm that dared to decide her worth. Every breath burned as she realized this wasn't about rules. It was about power, his over hers. And with the crowd pressing closer, the conflict was only just beginning. Step back! The guard's shout cracked like a whip, cutting through the chatter of the crowd. Heads turned, bodies slowed, and within moments, a circle began to form around them. His arm was still stretched across the gate, but now his voice carried farther than his reach. Nobody moves until I say so, he barked, his tone rising with authority that fed off the eyes gathering around. She froze, aware that every gaze was locked on her. What had been a private humiliation moments ago was now a public spectacle. I said, step back, he repeated, louder this time, drawing murmurs and uneasy chuckles from onlookers. Her heart pounded as whispers swirled. She wanted to speak, to cut through his manufactured drama, but each attempt to breathe was swallowed by the weight of his command. This wasn't about security. It was about domination, his need to prove control in front of an audience. And with every order he gave, the crowd leaned in, hungry for more. She clenched her fists, the sting of injustice sharper with each passing second. Knowing his voice had turned her into the target of a show she never agreed to star in. A flash lit the corner of her eye, then another. Within seconds, dozens of phones were raised, recording her shame as if it were entertainment. The guard smirked, feeding off the glow of the cameras. "Make sure you get this," he said to no one in particular, but loud enough for the audience to chuckle. Her chest tightened. "Stop recording," she whispered, but her plea was drowned out by laughter. The screens turned her humanity into content, her fear reduced to a spectacle for strangers who didn't know her story. The buzz of notifications, the soft beeps of cameras, the mocking commentary, all of it piled onto her like stones. One woman whispered, "She looks guilty." Another muttered, "Probably trying to sneak in." Her pulse quickened. Racism had taken many forms in her life, but this, being stripped of dignity for the amusement of others, cut deeper. Each video, each angle was a reminder that the crowd wasn't here to defend her. They were here to consume her suffering, and as the guard puffed his chest, the voices from the circle began to turn crueler. "Prove it!" a man jeered from the back, waving his phone like a torch. "If you're really who you say you are, prove it." The chant caught on. "Prove it! Prove it!" Her voice trembled but held steady. "I already showed my ticket. That's enough." But the guard leaned in, eyes glittering with mockery. "Guess they don't believe you either." Each cheer emboldened him, turning his authority into theater. "Come on," someone shouted. "She's bluffing." Another laughed. "Better story changes in a second." Their taunts sliced through her like glass. Every word dismissed her truth. Every laugh cemented the idea that she didn't belong. She swallowed hard, forcing back tears. She wanted to scream her father's name, to hurl it at them like a shield. But what good would that do? They weren't listening for the truth. They wanted a performance. And with the crowd egging him on, the guard found new fuel for his cruelty. She tried to steady her voice. "Why are you treating me like this? I've done nothing wrong." His response was a bark of laughter that sliced through her composure. "Listen to her! Acting like she's special." He turned to the crowd, his grin wide. These entitled types always think the rules don't apply. The word stung, more than the accusations about her ticket. Entitled, spoiled. It painted her as arrogant, as if she hadn't fought twice as hard just to stand here. "I'm not entitled," she said firmly, though her throat ached. "I just want the same respect as everyone else." But her dignity only fueled his performance. "Respect? Respect is earned. And from where I'm standing, you're nothing but trouble." The crowd erupted in laughter, his cruel humor echoing like thunder. She stood still, rooted in disbelief. He wasn't just questioning her, he was branding her, stamping her with words that the audience eagerly swallowed. And just when she thought the ridicule couldn't sink lower, another voice from the crowd cut through the noise. "She doesn't belong here!" a fan shouted, voice sharp with venom. The words spread quickly, fueling some and silencing others. A few in the circle cheered, nodding in agreement, while others gasped, their faces flickering with discomfort. "She paid for her ticket," one woman snapped back. "Let her in!" But her defense was drowned out by a wave of boos. The division only deepened the chaos. Voices clashing, tempers rising, the circle tightening. The guard thrived in the discord, his smirk widening. "See, even they know. Some of you don't fit in these seats." Her chest ached as the words burrowed deep. Belonging. Something she craved. Something her father had once told her she deserved, was slipping further away. And as the crowd split around her, the feeling of betrayal pressed heavier against her shoulders. For a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes. In the noise, in the cruelty, she felt the hollow ache of absence. If her father had been here, his steady hand would have shielded her, his presence enough to silence the cruelty. He would have stared the guard down, reminded him that respect wasn't optional, but he wasn't here. All she had was the echo of his words. "Stand tall. Don't let them shrink you." Her breath hitched as the truth settled. She was standing tall, but the weight was unbearable without him by her side. And as she opened her eyes, the guard leaned closer, ready to deliver the blow that would cut deepest. "You're banned," he declared, his voice sharp and smug. Until you bring real proof, you're not setting foot inside this place. The words slammed into her, heavier than any insult. Banned, not questioned, not delayed, erased. The crowd gasped, some in shock, others in delight. A few clapped, as if they had witnessed justice instead of injustice. Her throat tightened. That's not fair. You can't. He leaned in, cutting her off with a smirk. I can, and I just did. The betrayal was suffocating. He wasn't just denying her entry. He was stripping away her dignity in front of strangers who would walk away with their videos, their gossip, their twisted version of her story. Her composure cracked. But the storm inside her hadn't yet found release. The crowd surged closer, pushing her back against the cold iron of the gate. Her breath quickened, shallow and uneven. The weight of humiliation, the sting of betrayal, the absence of her father, it all collided at once. Her hands trembled as she gripped the bars, grounding herself against collapse. Somewhere inside, defiance flickered, but exhaustion smothered it, threatening to pull her under. Her heart raced, caught between breaking down completely and fighting back. And as the guard loomed, victorious for now, she stood on the edge, caught between collapse and the courage to rise. Hey, what's going on here? The voice cut through the noise like a lightning strike. Heads snapped around, and suddenly the guard wasn't the loudest presence anymore. From the crowd stepped a familiar figure, a former teammate of Kobe, his stature commanding instant respect. His eyes locked on her, recognition flashing immediately. Is this how you treat her? His voice was calm but sharp, like steel wrapped in velvet. Do you even know who you're talking to? The guard faltered, his smirk slipping. She didn't show proper... Don't! The word was final, slicing the excuse in half. I knew Kobe, I know his family, and I know he'd never stand for this kind of disrespect. Gasps spread through the onlookers. The tension that had suffocated her moments ago shifted, the spotlight dimming on her humiliation and burning hotter on the guard's cruelty. She inhaled slowly, her pulse steadying for the first time. For once, she wasn't entirely alone in the storm, and with one man's interruption, the balance of power began to tilt. Whispers moved like waves through the audience. That's Kobe's daughter, one voice murmured. No way! Look closer! Another gasped. It really is her. Phones lowered, not out of kindness, but awe, as recognition spread like wildfire. The very crowd that had taunted her seconds ago now shifted, curiosity replacing mockery. She's been telling the truth all along, someone muttered with shame. While another whispered, the guard really messed up this time. The ripples of realization became a tide, carrying with it a change she could feel in her chest. Where moments earlier her presence had been dismissed, now the connection to her father's legacy carried undeniable weight. The guard's posture stiffened as the circle of strangers no longer looked at her as an intruder but at him as the villain, and for the first time, the silence didn't belong to her, it belonged to him. I didn't know, the guard stammered, beads of sweat forming at his temple. His voice, once booming, now cracked under the weight of shifting judgment. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. Their eyes, their whispers, their disapproval pressed against him like invisible walls. I was just following protocol, he added quickly, trying to cling to authority. You can't blame me for being cautious, but his excuses fell flat. The former teammate's glare was unrelenting, and the audience's silence felt heavier than any cheer. Protocol doesn't explain humiliation, the man shot back. It doesn't explain mockery. Admit it. You thought you could push her around because of who she is or because of what she looks like. Her breath steadied as she watched the once dominant figure unravel. His badge no longer felt like power. It looked like armor he couldn't hide behind. And in that unraveling, she felt the first surge of control returning to her hands. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, strong and certain. Pressure makes you stronger. When they doubt you, stand taller. She lifted her chin, drawing in a deep breath. The trembling that once betrayed her was gone, replaced by a steadiness she hadn't felt since the confrontation began. Every lesson he'd taught her about resilience, about refusing to shrink under bias, wrapped itself around her like armor. She turned slightly toward the crowd, her voice no longer hesitant but clear. "I've been standing here the whole time telling the truth. You just didn't want to hear it." The murmurs grew louder, shifting toward support, and as her courage gathered, she realized the shadow of her father wasn't a burden. It was a shelter, one she could now step out of, carrying his strength as her own. Her eyes locked on the guard, her voice unwavering. "The world sees you now," she said, the words carrying like a strike of thunder. "They saw how you mocked me. They heard how you dismissed me, and no excuse will erase what you've shown today." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched, thick and condemning. She didn't lower her gaze. "You wanted to break me down to make me feel small, but I'm not the one exposed here, you are. Every person watching knows the truth. You judge me because of who I am and because of what I look like. And now the whole world will remember it." The crowd buzzed, their murmurs swelling into something undeniable. Her chest rose with resolve, the trembling gone, replaced with fire. For the first time since the ordeal began, she wasn't defending herself. She was leading the moment. "Enough. Step aside." Two stadium officials moved quickly, gripping the guard by the arm. The crowd parted as complaints poured from every direction. Witnesses spoke up, voices overlapping, recounting his insults and abuse. He tried to protest, but the authority he once flaunted evaporated. The same badge he'd hidden behind was stripped of its weight in an instant. "Effective immediately, you're suspended," one supervisor declared firmly. "We'll be investigating further." For the first time that night, the guard had no stage, no smirk, no control. His downfall came not with drama, but with simple, decisive accountability. Moments later, a stadium official addressed the shaken young woman directly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "On behalf of this arena, we deeply apologize for what you've endured tonight. What happened was unacceptable. We are committed to ensuring discrimination like this has no place here." The words weren't perfect, but they mattered. The apology shifted the air, turning humiliation into recognition. For once, the weight of responsibility didn't fall on her shoulders. It rested where it belonged. By the time she stepped inside, phones had already carried her story beyond the walls of the stadium. Clips flooded social media, each video sharper than the last. The guard's sneer, the crowd's cruelty, her resilience in the face of racism. Hashtags blazed across timelines. "Justice at the gate." "End discrimination." Us Her Voice Matters. News outlets replayed the footage, sparking national debate about prejudice in public spaces. What was once her private pain became a public reckoning, and this time the world wasn't silent. The injustice could no longer be ignored. When she finally walked onto the court, applause rose, not because of who her father was, but because of who she proved herself to be. The whispers of doubt that once chained her now crumbled beneath the weight of her dignity. For the first time all evening, she wasn't just Kobe's daughter. She was a woman standing tall, embodying the strength he instilled while defining her own place in the spotlight. At center court, she paused. The noise around her faded, replaced by the quiet echo of memory. She lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "For you, Dad, always." It wasn't a cry of defeat, but a vow of resilience, a promise that his legacy lived on through her, not as a shadow, but as a flame she carried forward. "If you had been standing there, watching that moment unfold," her voice drowned, her dignity stripped, "what would you have done? Would you stay silent in the crowd or step forward and defend her? Do you believe the guard deserves to lose everything for his actions, or should forgiveness have a place in this story? Is accountability enough, or must consequences run deeper? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts in the comments, spread this story so others see the truth, and subscribe to join a community determined to challenge racism wherever it appears. Together we rise,